Felling Shore on the south side of the Tyne, looking west towards Newcastle city centre. Below us, the playground that would fire up the imagination of a young girl and become the starting point on a poetic journey that lasts to this day. The passion for her hometown and writing successes would lead others to bestow upon her the title of the Princess of Felling. Northern Passion welcomes Elaine Cusack.
I was born in 1970 in Gateshead's Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I grew up down the hill in Felling and was aware of my proximity to the Tyne from an early age. Dad told me that true Geordies were those of us lucky enough to be born within 2 miles of the Tyne. I soon learnt the importance of the Tyne to my family. Dad told me about playing on Felling Shore with his friends and siblings as a boy. And Mam told me that her father used to swim in the Tyne when he was young. I loved hearing these family tales, but at the same time, I was developing my own relationship with the Tyne. The Friar's Goose pumping engine house is a ruin on Felling Shore. It's all that remains of the Tyne Main Colliery, also known as Friar's Goose Colliery, which closed in 1926. The engine house was used to drain water from the mine, but by the time I became acquainted with it in the mid-1970s, it was derelict, and someone had painted Elaine on one of the walls. I yelped with delight when I first saw my name. This building belonged to me. I had no idea of the building's history because Mam had made up her own story to amuse and satisfy my curiosity. She told me the building was once a castle that had belonged to the King and Queen of Felling. I was thrilled by this information and can remember asking Mam to repeat it over and over. Just imagine a royal residence down the road from my house. With my name daubed on one wall, it didn't take long before I renamed it My Castle. I loved visiting my castle and playing there with my cousin Jen or with friends. I remember running around it, climbing on it and believing I was the Princess of Felling. Sometimes Mam would bring a picnic lunch and I'd sit on one of the walls eating sandwiches and surveying my kingdom. I had plenty of ideas for the redevelopment of Felling. I knew my subjects would thank me for the changes I had in mind, but my grand plans were shattered during a visit to Beamish Museum. I was trying to sit through a documentary about mining when a picture of my castle appeared on the screen. I couldn't understand why the commentary made no reference to the King and Queen of Felling. I wanted to tell the audience the truth about the ruin, but stopped short of standing on my chair and yelling, "That's my castle."
Have you heard about the princess and the goose? Have you heard about the princess and the goose? Born and raised on the banks of the Coley Tyne. Have you heard about the princess
And the goose.
Have you heard about the princess and the goose? Born and raised on the banks of the Coley Tyne.
I'm the princess, princess of the Felling Shore. I'm the princess, princess of the Felling Shore.
Born and raised on the south side of the Tyne.
was 2010 and Michael Chaplin, the local writer, was writer in residence for the Port of Tyne Authority. And he did a call out for people's River Tyne memories. So I sent this piece, it was maybe a couple of thousand words, about growing up near the Tyne and about my relationship with the Friars Goose pumping engine house on Felling Shore. And he wrote back and said he would use it and said, oh, you've got to call it the Princess of Felling. That's the title. And I thought, that's a good name. And then for the best part of a decade, I had a folder called The Princess of Felling, or POF for short, and I'd put in all my poems and fragments about growing up in Felling. And of course, all of those became the basis of my 2019 memoir, The Princess of Felling. Available. It's not available from all good booksellers, but it is available from my website. And my publisher and friend Angie refers to me as the Princess, and it has become a bit of a nickname. So that's where it's come from.
Well, thanks very much for that, Elaine. So your passions encompass a diverse range of activities. You're a writer, a performer, a bookseller, to name just a few of your talents. But it seems a love for poetry is at the heart of everything you do. Can you share with us how your passion for poetry was ignited and how your journey as a writer began?
I write about this very specifically in The Princess of Felling, but I will tell you now. It's funny with poetry, it just hit me. And it hit me on holiday in, of all places, Northern Ireland in Easter 1985. I was on a family holiday, and at the time I was completely and utterly obsessed with music, in particular the Smiths, and I wanted nothing more than to be like Morrissey, but also to meet my very own Johnny Marr. So I wrote, when I was on holiday, what I thought were lyrics to a song, and of course they were pretty bad. But and then I just thought, actually, this is not a song. I think this is a poem. And then these song things kept coming every single day. And I then sort of ended up going and looking up poets in Newcastle's library, and then became sort of overcome with the idea that I was writing poetry. And then I saw that the Evening Chronicle had a poetry competition, and that was in September 1985. And I can only describe as bombarded the judges with some of my poems. It was being judged by the Evening Chronicle in conjunction with Blood Axe Books, the leading independent poetry publishers. I didn't know that at the time. And they created a special prize for me, an adult prize, a weeks-long residential course for writers. And I had to wait till I was 16 until I could actually have that particular prize. So that's how it happened. And actually at that, in that competition, I got to meet one of the other prize winners, a guy called Jeff Smith. And he went on to publish my first book of poetry, Bed and Breakfast with Lydia Lunch. But things come full circle, because this October, I am the co-judge of North Tyneside Library's inaugural poetry competition, Poetry Tyne, with my friend and fellow poet Rob Walton. And also, 2 days after we launch that, I'm going to be here in the Republic Gallery performing alongside the aforementioned Jeff Smith. So it's been like 37 years since we last performed together. We're going to be performing together in October, and I'll be delighted to hear Jeff's debut novel at the age of 77 or thereabouts, his debut novel called Holy Disorder. So yeah, poetry started all those years ago, back in 1985. I'm still writing daft stuff now, and I'm still performing.
Well, thanks for that, Elaine. That's been really informative. Where do your ideas come from? What makes you say, I need to write a poem about this incident or that topic? And what determines success for you when you're writing a poem? And when do you know a poem's finished?
Very good questions. And this is going to sound a bit odd to someone who isn't a writer or who isn't an artist, because I'm going to say that it's got nothing to do with me. It's got everything to do with my poetic muse, or Missy Muse, as I call her. She's very much the one who wears the trousers in this relationship. And I do see her very much as sort of leather-clad, roaring around on a motorbike. And sometimes, you know, she'll get in touch and she'll say, you know, these words like that, and you're going to perform it like this. And I'd say, are you sure? I mean, I'm not going to be able to get away with it. And she'll just go, she's insistent. This is how it has to be. So she's in charge. But then what happens as well when I've got an idea for a poem, it just won't let me go. It won't leave me alone. So, and I find good things to do to get sort of help the poem along is to maybe do things like lighthouse work or, you know, running, walking, swimming, bit of meditation, all that kind of like sort of moving, but then the brain's just being allowed to do its own thing. Cooking's another good example of doing that. And with poems, you know, they're all different. Sometimes they can come out fully formed. Other times it's a case of draft and redraft. And this can go on for days, weeks, months, or even years in some cases. And as for when a poem is finished, again, this is going to sound really odd. It's about the percentage of Elaine-ness in it. I know that sounds a bit pretentious, but I'll read a poem and I'll just think, yeah, that's got enough lines that are sort of Elaine-y in them. And then there'll be the final line. I'll just think, bingo, you've nabbed it, you've sorted it. It's got enough of me in it. And if that sounds terribly sort of egotistical, then so be it. But that's how I write poems. And I can't explain it to you in any other way than that. And if you don't like them, you can blame my Missy Muse.
Do you have a favourite poem that you've written? And what is it about that poem that makes you feel the way you do about it?
There's one poem that I've got called The Souvenir of Tynemouth, and I guess it's my greatest hit. You know, it's the one that everyone wants to hear when I perform it. Fair enough, and I do love it. And it's very Elaine-y. It's got a lot of Elaine in it. But then there's another poem called Voiced Silent K, which sort of reflects my love of the German language. And I've known people leave my gigs because they dislike it so much, but I happen to love it. A few years ago, I got into writing haiku, which is obviously a Japanese form of poetry, 3 lines long, 17 syllables. Absolutely love writing haiku. They're you know, favourites of mine. But I'd have to say my absolute favourite is a poem I wrote on the residential writing course. I told you that I'd won the competition back in 1985. Had to wait till I was 16 to go on this competition. And there I was at the Arvon Foundation in Hebden Bridge in Yorkshire. And it's a home of Ted Hughes, but it's very close to Sylvia Plath's grave. I mean, I was really into Sylvia Plath. I was in hog heaven. I was going up to her grave and in the early morning and going back and writing stuff. And I was on this course with all these amazing writers and poets like UA Fanthorpe and Wendy Cope and stuff. And we'd had lunch and I went out in the sunshine and I just lay down. And when I woke up, this poem was in my head and it was fully formed. And it's called Short Thought. I wish I had rings running through me like trees. Then you'd know I wasn't lying about my age. This is a very short poem called Looking, Not Listening, and it's inspired by a trip to Bowes Museum in Barnard Castle, or Barnard Castle, as certain newscasters used to say during lockdown. Looking, Not Listening. Silver Swan sings 200-year-old words inside a soundproof glass cabinet in Bowes Museum in Barnard Castle. Onlookers watch the bird open its mouth. They take photographs, but don't understand this swan's song. They don't hear the swan's lament. This poem is about my dad. It's called Cheerio. That summer you died, I saw, smelt and heard messages from you in nature. Bird song was louder than ever before. You turned up the volume, then left. This poem's called Long Sands. Mist descends as we walk along the beach from Cullercoats to Tynemouth. The first sea fret of the year always catches us by surprise. We stop to look at each other and laugh at our wet curling hair. We've wet skin too. Our morning walk is like taking a cold Turkish bath, fully clothed. The foghorn is all around us, an insistent, lonesome wind instrument, crying for adoption by an orchestra, howling for a home and a family. The loud sound resonates in our chests and our hearts, and it connects us with our seaside compañeros and their dogs exercising together on long sands. Listen to the sound of our coastline. Can our cousins hear the foghorn hundreds of nautical miles away in Bergen, Esbjerg and Stavanger? This one's called The Funeral. She told them all to go away. She said it calmly and clearly. She articulated feeling they thought buried under history. She told them all to shut up and stop their amateur dramatics. She'd had enough of their mob rule, dysfunction and histrionics. She told them all to go away, mum, dad, gran, extended family plus siblings, side by side. Poor thing was drowning in their misery. Her abuser had the gall to work the room as she stood watching, shaking. Be nice, hissed mum. Be good. Don't make a scene now. The family's listening. The anger that she'd felt for years and those scripts she'd had to follow filled up her throat, her mouth, her mind. She tried, but she couldn't swallow. And inside, she cried like times before. Mummy, the pain, the agony. But mum, dad, gran, extended clan ignored her anxiety. So she told them to go away. She said it firmly and clearly. She articulated feelings they claimed were ancient history. She told them all to shut up and cease their amateur dramatics, 2 fingers to mobocracy, dysfunction and histrionics. She told them all to go away, yeah, but expressed herself non-verbally. She left that wake without a sound, kept walking, and you know something? She's never looked back. Thank you.
What advice would you give to a writer just starting their career today?
It's a very good question. I read, I think it might have been in the Writers and Artists Yearbook, the writer Julie Meyerson gave one bit of advice, and she said to write for 5 minutes a day. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting, because you think, well, 5 minutes a day is not very much. But then think about it. It's actually quite hard to every single day write for 5 minutes. Now, my friend Sandy Chadwin thinks that's wrong. He thinks that you shouldn't feel you have to write for 5 minutes or any length of time every day. You should just write when you feel like it. I take his point. But I would then say, okay, even if you don't write creatively for 5 minutes a day or more, then why don't you just do something writerly? It could be applying for a competition, or it could be just sorting your notes out, just doing something that puts you in the frame of mind of being a writer. So that's one bit of advice. I'd also give a bit of advice when you're performing. And that is, my friends, less is more. If I'm asked to read for 20 minutes, I'll read for 18, 19 minutes. If I'm asked to read for half an hour, I'll probably read for 25, 26 minutes. I will never ever go over it. And I think if you're a writer starting out and you stand up and you start reading and you haven't timed yourself, and then you sort of say, oh, do you mind if I just read a few more? You're going to alienate people and you're not going to be asked back to perform. So that's my big bit of advice when it comes to performing. Less is more. Trust me.
You mentioned earlier, Elaine, that community was very important to you. Can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, I think if you were to cut me open, I'm not suggesting that you do, but if you were to cut open my arm, you would find, like a stick of rock, two words. You'd see poetry and you'd see community. And I've been involved in volunteering in my communities, various communities, almost as long as I've been writing poetry. I started off a volunteer at St Oswald's Hospice here in the Northeast, and I went on to, work in like a homeless shelter in central London, to being, on committee members and trustee of various charities in Cambridge and back up in the Northeast. And so it's very, very important to me. And my current work is I've just become a trustee of a very new charitable organisation set up by my friend, the artist Gail Curry, and it's called Tyne Arts North. And our aim is to have an arts centre in North Tyneside. And you might think, well, there's loads of cultural things happening in North Tyneside. Oh yeah, but there's not an arts centre. And that is our aim. It's early days yet. And I do know, Ken, that you're going to be talking with Gail quite soon, and she'll probably tell you more about it. But that's my latest thing. I'm quite passionate about that. And I just think, so community voluntary works always run alongside whatever I'm doing, alongside paid work, alongside my writing. But they're intertwined. And, when I think about community as well, I think about all the various collaborations I've got going on with other writers and artists and just other people. Like, I love this gallery here, and it's all about making connections with different people in whatever community I'm in.
So, as well as writing and performing poetry, you've also written songs and performed in a band. Please share with us your musical achievements.
Well, I'm not a musician. I've never played the guitar. Well, I've tried to, but I'm not very good, and I can't really play the keyboard. I can shake the odd maraca. But yeah, I love singing, And again, I'm not a massive diva or whatever, but I just enjoy singing. I was in my school choir. I used to dabble in a bit of Gilbert and Sullivan. I must admit, that's not Gilbert or Sullivan, but Gilbert and Sullivan. I used to enjoy a few of their operas. And in the mid-90s, I was in various bands in London, notably working alongside a guitarist called David O'Connell, who I used to go out with and be married to. He's a fantastic guitarist. And we, most notably, was a band called Micklewhite. And I dubbed us the 4 Keith Moons of the rock apocalypse. And you know what? No one ever challenged me on that. We adored Hendrix, PJ Harvey, the Beatles, bit of Led Zeppelin and some indie stuff. And we were able to gig in London and record did a few recording sessions. And as I was thinking about the band, actually, I just remembered that at one of our gigs, we had celebrity TV couple, John Stapleton and the late Lynn Folds-Wood were in the audience because their offspring was in one of the other bands performing on the same bill, rock and roll. So we were great. We did that. We thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. And I mean, I'd love to be in a band at the minute, but I haven't really got time. But when I was working on The Princess of Felling, I thought it might be quite nice to have a little bit of a music accompaniment to the book. So I got together with a local musician called Mike Waller, and we wrote what I would describe as a sort of mini opera called The Princess and the Piano, songs about Felling. And I think you might be using one of them as a sort of soundtrack to this particular film. So we had fun doing that. Again, as I say, I'm not the world's greatest singer, but it's just another way of expressing myself.
Thanks for that, Elaine. So we've talked quite a bit there about, your achievements and what you've done. What does the future hold for Elaine?
Good question. Well, I think if we're talking short term and long term, short term, certainly in the run up to sort of Christmas, it looks like I've probably got about about 5 gigs lined up. They're all very different and involve different sort of collaborations. So let me tell you, at the end, in September, I've got the first Talk of the Town. It's a sold out gig with 2 daft lads from Scunthorpe, Steve Drayton and Rob Walton. And we will be performing poetry, but we will also be maybe doing a few dance routines and a little bit of singing. It's all very scary. And then after that, I'm going to be, as I might have mentioned earlier, launching North Tyneside Library's poetry competition, Poetry Time. And then after that, performing here with Jeff Smith. So that's quite exciting. And then in November, I've got an event called Drifting as Clouds. And that's with my friend Sandy Chadwin and my first cousin, once removed, Ross Punton. Again, poetry and prose, and that's going to be at Whitley Bay Library. So that's very much in the short term. In the long term, I would love to be able to have a full collection of my poetry published. Easier said than done. Obviously, you're going to have a real publisher to do that, as opposed to just sort of publishing small pamphlets, etc. So we live in hope about that. I would love to do more and more gigs. I've got some crazy ideas for yet more collaborations. I'd love to see the work as a trustee of Tyne Arts North come to fruition. You know, we've got this idea for an arts centre for North Tyneside. This is going to be a wholly inclusive venture. It's going to have hopefully a cafe stroke dry bar. It's going to have exhibition space. It's going to have spaces for workshops and performance space, of course. Hopefully I'll be able to perform there. And then more for me personally, you know, I would love to travel a bit, and I do really care about the environment, and I'm not talking about racking up loads of air miles, but you know, there's 2 little. Well, I know that my poetic muse, would very much like to go to Canada and to New Zealand, and you know, she gets her way when it comes to writing poetry, so she's probably going to get away with, you know, where we're going to go on holiday. So watch this space.
Such a busy lady, Elaine. Where do you get your energy from?
Where do I get the energy from? Well, do you know what? I'll tell you a few things about that. My dad claimed that I never slept for the first 2 years of my life. You know, he just said I'd just be up all the time. And of course, my poor parents never got any sleep. And he sort of cured me by sort of just sitting beside my bed. And every time I kind of kept bouncing up, he'd just say, now, come on, Elaine, go to sleep, you know. And all of that. But I've got very early memories of bouncing around the house, you know, before I could even properly walk, you know, just bouncing about. And also then when I could walk, you know, just being up really early in the morning and just loving that silence and knowing that this belonged to me. And I do get that, you know, that's the time when I'm most creative nowadays. But a fair few years ago, I went to an osteopath in Cambridge and she was quite a unconventional osteopath. She sort of, I was grinding my teeth and she actually like had her hand inside my mouth, right? But then she sort of like bounced away from me as if she'd got like an electric shock. It was quite startling. And she just said, wow, you've got some energy in you. You've got a real sort of life force. And then she said to me, you know, you nearly died before you were born, didn't you? And I just said to her, how do you know that? She said, the car accident. So she could tell from my body that I had been involved in a car accident when I was in my mum's womb. And that is true. That is actually true. So I don't know whether there's that or whatever, but yeah, I do have an insane amount of energy and I don't ever see any signs of that changing, you know, just as well, because I've got loads of stuff to do, Ken. Come on, I've not even got time to sit here.
I could do with some of your energy myself, Elaine. Well, that's been absolutely fascinating. Thanks very much for being a guest on the channel, Elaine, and I look forward to working with you again in the future.
I really hope we do, Ken. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Whenever you're ready, Elaine,
Oh,
just
right, okay.
just give a little.
I just was like lost in a sort
Just
of.
no, that I was. So
I clapping again?
just give a little clap.
Oh,
Yeah.
this is the best bit, man. Right. Foghorn is all around us, an insistent, lonesome wind bollocks. That's not part of the poem. This poem is called Long Sounds. Oh no, shall we let go?
Yeah, we'll do. I thought, oh no, I'm forgetting.
This poem's called Evensong. This poem's called Evensong.
You don't need to tell me
Rope,
about that.
rope, man, rope against metal. Rope.
And welcome to the channel. So the name Elaine Cusack and the Princess of Felon have become synonymous with each other. How did this come about?
Well, first of all, it's Cusack, not Cusack. But I know we're just doing this as a test run anyway, so just to tell you that, otherwise I'd have to...
Cusack.
Cusack, think about Q, the letter Q.
Q.
Cusack.
Q.
Yes, yes, yes. Anyway, but yeah.